Hello, my name is Stephanie Sturm. I'm a PhD student at the University of Barcelona. I work with Iria San Miguel in the Brain Lab research group, and I am presenting an EEG study about the sense of agency. I have 5 minutes, so bear with me, please. The sense of agency is the feeling of being the agent, the source, or the one that controls a sensory stimulus. The sense of agency implicitly accompanies our own actions and helps us distinguish between ourselves and the outside world. A disruption of the sense of agency can lead to illusions and hallucinations. On a neural level, the sense of agency is often associated with the phenomenon of sensory attenuation. Two well-known ERP components that are often studied in this context, the N1 and the P2, are typically attenuated when a stimulus is self-generated. However, we cannot equate self-generation and the sense of agency. It is known that both the predictability and the proximity of a stimulus to a motor act modulate the ERP responses. So in order to better understand how the sense of agency is reflected in ERPs, and in order to understand what exactly drives the well-known effects of N1 and P2 attenuation, more work is needed. We conducted an EEG experiment in which participants were trained to press one out of two buttons around 500 milliseconds after a cue. Each button was associated with a different sound. In acquisition trials, the sounds followed the button presses immediately and were always congruent. The relationships between buttons and sounds did not change. In test trials, participants had to press a button of their choice around 500 milliseconds after the cue test appeared on the screen, and a sound was presented up to 120 milliseconds before or after the button press, and could be either congruent or incongruent, either correct or false based on what they had learned before. They were then asked whether they felt like they generated the sound. This made it possible for us to look at how congruency and timing of sounds would influence the ERPs. We analyzed data from 26 participants, and behavioral data showed that both action sound congruency and the timing of button press and sound influenced explicit agency judgments. Incongruent sounds were predominantly judged as externally generated, and more so if they were presented before the button press. Congruent sounds were judged as self-generated if they succeeded a button press, and, as can be seen in the graph on the right, even if they preceded a button press by up to minus 40 milliseconds, they were overwhelmingly judged as self-generated. This slide shows the ERPs of test sounds in different conditions. The first graph shows the average activity from 26 participants at the FZ electrode linked to sounds presented after, in red, or before, in blue, button presses. We find no significant modulation of the N1, but a very strong negative peak with a latency of 200 milliseconds. This is pretty much the same effect we saw when comparing sounds judged as self or externally generated. The topographical plots show the activations across the skull in the N200 time window. We see that the effect is driven by frontocentral electrodes. The second graph shows congruent and incongruent sounds presented after the button press. Again, congruency modulates ERPs around 200 milliseconds post-stimulus. Graph number 3 shows N200 amplitude variations depending on whether the sound was presented before, in red, during, in blue, or after, in yellow, the button press. The fourth graph shows differences between short and long delays between button presses and sounds. In summary, explicit agency judgments were affected by congruency and temporal order, while temporal proximity plays a very small role. The ERP responses in the 200 millisecond range were strongly modulated by order of button press and sound. N200 amplitude reflects temporal order of button press and sound, and proximity to the button press in positive trials modulates N200 P2 amplitude. Sound congruency affected ERPs only if the button presses preceded the sounds, and N1 was not significantly modulated by any of our conditions. Taken together, these results suggest that we should be looking at the time range around 200 milliseconds post-stimulus for indicators of the implicit sense of agency. Thank you for your attention. I'm sorry this was so fast. If you have any questions, please get in touch during the conference or on Twitter. Thank you.